Let's take a look at the Mauryan Empire as part of our classical civilizations exploration. Let's begin by taking a look at Chandragupta Maurya. He is the leader and the founder of the Mauryan dynasty, and he does this around 305 BC because he was able to raise a vast army by this time of 600,000 soldiers who were on foot, 30,000 soldiers on horseback, and even had 9,000 elephants. So you can imagine that this would have been an impressive sort of war machine that he would have had at his disposal. In fact, it was so impressive that he eventually was able to defeat Seleucus I, who was one of Alexander the Great's generals, who had actually controlled much of what we would call today Persia and had hopes of conquering the Indus Valley. But Chandragupta Maurya was able to defeat him, and after a negotiation was able to force Seleucus I to give over most of his eastern provinces so that Chandragupta basically controlled the Indus Valley. Okay. What's important about Chandragupta Maurya, though, is that he unites North India politically for the first time. And so the Mauryan Empire is going to be a fairly large empire, and it's going to be under the control of one individual, in this case Chandragupta Maurya. Here's a map. You can see from 250 BC to AD 400 that the Mauryan Empire not only was large, but also lasted a significant amount of time. And if you look up here in the north, you can see here's the Indus River Valley. So they had control of the Indus River. They also controlled much of North India along the Ganges River over here, and a fairly significant part of central India along what we call both the Western Ghats, the Eastern Ghats, and the Deccan Plateau. All right? So again, just south of the Himalaya Mountains, but most of what we would consider to be India today was under Mauryan Empire's control, as well as much of what we today would call Pakistan, and also going into some parts of Afghanistan. Okay, the next person that you should know from this time period is Asoka, and he's actually Chandragupta Mauryan's grandson. And in 269 BC, he also had to wage war. He was in the process of consolidating power and also expanding the empire. Now, during this warfare, there was a lot of bloodshed. 100,000 soldiers were slain, and thousands of civilians were killed. Now, as a result of that, Asoka felt really bad, and so he converted to Buddhism after victory. I mean, essentially, he felt sorrow for all the death. So he was so disturbed by the fighting and the amount of death and destruction that had been caused that he decided to convert to Buddhism, which was a fairly new religion at this time period. Now, he also rejected violence, and he decided that he would rule by moral example. So this is one of the reasons why we look at Asoka as a philosopher king, that his actions are very much meant to be a role model for other people to follow. So he rejects violence, and he ruled by moral example. Very similar to what we saw with Confucius in China. All right, so what did he do? Well, he set up pillars announcing laws and promising righteous government. These pillars were set up throughout India, and of course on them would have been carved the laws that people were expected to adhere to. So this idea that you could have a righteous government, a government that looked out for the people, that had a rule of law, and that people had to obey those laws because they would be written on pillars where everybody could see. Very similar to what we've seen with ancient Rome, with the 12 tables, and also even Mesopotamia with Hammurabi's law being carved on a stone stele. Here's another example. So you get a good example of what one of the pillars looks like. And if you look at this map over here and you look at the key, you can see that this sort of upside down T represents pillar edicts, and they also carved them on rocks. So you'll look for these sort of small triangles. And if you look closely at the map, you'll be able to see that within the empire, these pillars and rock edicts were located throughout the empire for everybody to see. Mostly, actually, along the Ganges River Valley in the north. Okay, what else did he do then? He also became a vegetarian. So this is something that would be consistent with his conversion to Buddhism. And he limited Hindu animal sacrifices. So he didn't like the fact that Hindus oftentimes sacrificed animals to their gods. He believed that not only should you be a vegetarian, but also that you need to respect the rights of animals as well, not just people. So he tried to limit Hindu animal sacrifice, but again, he lived a life of a vegetarian so that people would follow his example. His rule then brought peace and prosperity and united diverse people in his realms. So again, there were Hindus, there were Buddhists, there was a host of different ethnic groups and people who spoke different languages all throughout South Asia, and by sort of combining his beliefs of Buddhism and maybe being a vegetarian and being tolerant and promoting peace and nonviolence. He thought that that would make his empire more prosperous, and of course that would bring people closer together. And during his reign, that did work. Unfortunately, after his reign, people began to once again fight over the same issues that they usually fought about: wealth, power, religion, that sort of thing. Now, what are some of the things that he did to promote Buddhism? He came up with the idea of Dhamma. Now, be careful, this is very different than the concept of Dharma, which is going to come up later on when we talk about Buddhism. But Dhamma is a set of ethics, and it's basically a way for people to treat each other and animals with respect. So again, he's including humans and animals as living things. It's very similar to the Buddhist concept of Dharma, but be careful. Dhamma and Dharma are not the same thing. They're similar, but they're different. So you're going to want to associate Dhamma with Ashoka and his attempts to promote Buddhism, and Dharma is something we're going to take a look at later on when we actually look at Buddhism in our World Religions unit. All right, let's take a look at ways that Ashoka promoted Buddhism. First, respect and compassion for others. Fair treatment for all. Benevolence, which is another way of saying love. Non-violence. Religious toleration. Helping the unfortunate. And humane treatment of animals. So these are all some of the major ideas that Ashoka tried to promote as he ruled. And again, you can see at the bottom here where it says, King Ashoka abandoned violence and fear and adopted reason and persuasion to rule his empire. So again, during his time period, the Mauryan Empire was at its height. It wouldn't last past Ashoka's own rule, but basically his ideas set the stage for sort of benevolent rulership for later emperors that would follow.